Hey everyone, welcome back. I am Jen Sorensen. Thank you so much for joining me today. We are going to be talking about some tips and tricks for QuiltCon. Now, why should you listen to me? Well, I have been to every single QuiltCon except two. I also work in the IT industry and have been to a number of conferences through the years in the tech industry across Vegas, Orlando, Chicago, you name it, size from a couple hundred to 70, 80,000 people trade shows. So I have some experience attending some of these, and I want to share some of my tips and tricks, especially if you're new to this, if you've never attended QuiltCon or a large quilt show. And I'm going to give you some that will be timeless while 2025 is going to be in Phoenix. These should hold true for future QuiltCons pending any changes here and there. So let's jump into some of my personal recommendations and tips based on my experience. And if you have any more as well, if you've been, or if you have any questions, we'll throw them in the comments. But for now, let's jump into my first tip. Okay, tip number one, do not overschedule yourself. It is so easy to look at the schedule, sign up for classes, which at this point, everyone should have signed up for classes. Lectures are probably still available here and there, but you really want to kind of look at your schedule and assess what you have going on. At this point, you're going to start to see vendors, sponsors coming out with activities, different celebrities announcing various meetups and activities in booths, demos. And what I find helpful is creating a spreadsheet. I love a good color-coded spreadsheet, especially. What I like to do with my friends that I'm attending with is create a Google Sheet where we can all have access, and we put in the different activities. What classes are we attending? What lectures do we want to go to? What demos? And I like to color coordinate and say, okay, green might be my priority. Orange, nice to have. Gray, good to know that it's going on, but I probably won't attend. Then I can pull this up on my phone while on site to kind of look at what I had initially reviewed and kind of decided I wanted to go to. The app will be very helpful for reviewing and planning overall, but sometimes it can be overwhelming trying to find things. So if you've done some pre-planning and done some pre-work in a way, it will make life easier. So review the demos, review vendor social media for demos, lectures, meetups, all of that stuff, and prioritize. There is so much going on that you really want to take a minute to kind of see what you want to prioritize. It's going to take a while to go through all of the quilts, to go through the vendor hall and all of that on top of everything else. So just try not to schedule yourself too thin, because you'll thank yourself later. And you can always add stuff on, but if you double book, triple book yourself, it's gonna be tricky. Okay, my next tip, which kind of goes along with the first one, schedule in rest. Now, you may wanna think about packing some recovery tools. Do you like a foam roller, rolling stick? I like my Theragun Mini, which is kind of like a small massage gun, because you're going to be standing on concrete. You're going to be standing quite a bit, which you may not be used to. So you want to pack some recovery tools. Maybe you have a bathtub in your room or Airbnb or anything like that. Bring some Epsom salts to soak in at the end of the night. Make sure you are scheduling breaks to rest and sit for a little bit. That's where I really like to schedule some lectures or demos where I can sit down and relax and take a little bit of a break. It also gives me some time to take all in everything that I've seen. It gives me an opportunity to process some of the stunning quilts that I've seen. It gives me time to think about the vendors that I've gone to see and what do I want to purchase? What do I want to do? Scheduling breaks, even if it's just meals, it could be, quick service, to go, something like that, or sit down. just to give yourself some time, both physical and mental breaks and rest. If you're an introvert like me, sometimes you just need to step away and find a quiet place to not talk to anyone as well. That's okay. Go back to your room, go relax, find a quiet place outside, bury yourself in a notebook and start sketching and doodling. But it's going to be a lot over the course of a time. So please be sure to schedule in some rest. We're kind of progressing here into tip number 3, which relates to tip 1 and 2. And that is to make sure you are wearing comfy shoes and be aware of what you're carrying. And I say this because I mentioned earlier, you're going to be standing on concrete. You are going to be walking around quite a bit. You likely are not used to this. When you're standing on the concrete for a while, your back, your shoulders, your posture is going to shift. When you're carrying and holding a lot of things, water bottles, notebooks, purchases, goodies that you're getting for free, if you're carrying them on one shoulder, if you are wearing a backpack, all of that stuff is going to have an impact on how you feel physically. I'm a big fan of OOFOS, OOFOS. I'll put a link down below. I'm reaching down, grabbing. I wear these around the house all the time as slides with socks, as slippers, but they have sneakers. They have things that are really comfortable for walking around trade shows. I would also recommend bringing 1 or 2 additional pairs of shoes and mixing them out each day so that you're giving your feet, your back, your body a break. You may want to think about compression socks, but test them out before. I have a personal experience where I wore compression socks after a marathon on a flight, thinking it was going to help me. And I don't wear them that often, but I wanted to avoid some blood clots like a lot of doctors recommend. I ended up getting a lot of bruising on my legs because of that, because I wasn't used to it. So right now, if you're thinking about something like that, if you have circulation issues, test some of these things out, test your shoes for a while, stand for a while, and see what's working for you. And then again, don't carry too much in your bag if you can help it, and be very aware of how it is that you're carrying, what it is that you're carrying. Backpacks, one shoulder, waist bags, anything like that. Start to think about what works for you, because again, if you're standing a while, you may find that your back, your shoulders, all of that stuff is going to hurt because of this. And if you're not used to it, it's gonna add out. All right, tip number 4. And for this one, it's gonna be really hard, but I wanna recommend that you spread seeing quilts and vendors out over the course of several days if possible. And I think this applies to people that are going for the entirety of QuiltCon. If you're only going for one day, you're gonna have to make the most of it. In my experience, there is so much to take in. I will walk the show floor 2, 3, 4 times and some of the vendors, because it can be very busy in the very beginning. Everyone's excited, amped. There's this energy, there's this excitement, and it's really hard to not get caught up in it. So my recommendation and way of tackling things is think about your priorities, and then focus on certain categories of quilts at each segment of time. So maybe the first day, if you're going for multiple days, you focus on 3 or 4 quilt categories, and you walk those sections a couple times to take it all in and really process. The next day you do the same thing, and then alternatively, you're looking at maybe a couple rows of vendors. Now, this is a little tricky because there are going to be some vendors that have unique and cool things that stuff will sell out immediately on the first day. That being said, we'll get into this in some upcoming tips as well, but be thoughtful about some of your purchases, because at the end of the event, a lot of vendors will do some sales and discounts of what's left. So it's a balance. You have to, again, think about your priorities. But what I like to do is think about, okay, what are my top types of quilts that I want to see? What are the vendors that I want to see? All of the vendors are listed online now. Go take a look at them, kind of do some research. The more preparation you have time to do, I think the more successful your experience is going to be. It's going to be very overstimulating at times. If this is your first time, it's going to be overwhelming. But what I also recommend is the show is usually much quieter on a Sunday, and early in the morning, later in the evenings, it's easier to kind of process things at that point in time. Again, I'm an introvert and it can be very overstimulating at times. So I will do multiple passes of the quilts. Guaranteed, I'm going to miss some the first 1-2 passes through, and then I'll see more. And quilts that I have seen before, I'm going to notice different things about them, the details, little bits that maybe in first pass when there's a lot of people around a quilt, I missed the first time around. And it's really cool to go back a second time and be like, oh, I never noticed that about this quilt. That's really cool. All right, we are on to tip number 5, and that is to bring a reusable bag or plan a bag appropriately for yourself for purchases and freebies. Now, there are 2 different kinds of vendors at QuiltCon and many other conferences like this. You're gonna have your traditional vendors that are gonna have stuff set up to shop and purchase from. And then you're gonna have your sponsors. Many of these sponsors' booths are more display and they're not selling things. This could be a fabric company where they're not selling something themselves, they're highlighting some of their latest lines. They are showcasing their solids and what they have coming up, some of their notions, allowing the vendors there to sell their goods because they don't want to compete with them. But in those booths, you will often find make and take items. It could be making a small quilt block or a postcard. It could be, any number of things, some hand quilting things to take along with you. These things take up space, so make sure that you are planning that appropriately. Speaking of your bag and what you put inside of it, a couple things that you may want to think about. One is a reusable water bottle, but think a little bit about the size of that water bottle and how heavy it is, because that can add weight to things. You want a portable phone charger or whatever devices that you have, make sure that you have something to charge them with, because if you're constantly photographing things, it's gonna drain your battery. If you're taking video, all of that stuff, it's gonna add up. Always helpful to have a reusable charger. You want some pens, notebooks, especially something with some grids on it to sketch some ideas. You are going to be so inspired. You are going to want to leave QuiltCon ready to make something. So when ideas are sparked, you want to be able to jot them down right away. Pack a few snacks as well, because in my personal experience, the food in some of these venues is not always the greatest. It's vendor food at a convention center, which for me, I have a gluten allergy and I can't always find something that is decent for me to eat. So I will pack some snacks as well. Now, please be aware of the rules and don't eat around the quilts and some of the vendors. We want to respect the art that is there, and we don't want to spill anything on the quilts or any fabric or anything like that. But keep some stuff with you. The other thing I would think about is it can be very loud there. So if loud noises bother you in your bag, you may want to have those earplugs or something, or headphones to put on to kind of help reduce the simulation and make it a little bit easier to help yourself, which is another reason to kind of schedule in some breaks. It's a lot. And then I think, like anyone else, you may want to think about if you want to bring some masks, if it starts to get crowded, people are sick, worried about large crowds, something to think about. But really, phone charger, device charger, pens, markers, notebooks, water bottle, snacks, mask, earbuds, those are all kinds of things that you may want to think about to bring with you to the actual venue itself, and then an extra reusable bag or something like that to put any freebies or purchases in. All right, tip number 6, and again, we're kind of building on all of these tips. Make sure you save some space in your luggage. Now, the way that the Modern Quilt Guild does the goodie bags at QuiltCon lately has been on a random basis, where you have a little notation on your badge if you receive a goodie bag. There's lots of free goodies in there. It's not guaranteed, but that you're gonna need some space in your luggage. You're also gonna need any of the freebies, vendor purchases, giveaways, anything like that. It adds up. Something you may wanna think about is putting in a really nice collapsible tote bag that you could use as an additional carry-on or a check bag in your suitcase on your way there, but don't come with a giant packed suitcase with no room for anything else unless you truly plan to not purchase anything and not take any freebies. In my experience, you're gonna leave with more than you came with. Okay, number 7, when you are taking pictures of the quilts, we're going back to the quilt show a little bit, make sure that you are taking pictures of the signage for each quilt. And when you are posting about them, you are properly crediting the artist. And when I say artists, I am using a plural there. It could be the actual quilter, the machine quilter, the members of the bee. Have a process in place too for how you're going to do it. My process is I photograph the quilt vertically, I photograph the quilt horizontally, and then I photograph the label. And when I photograph the label, I like to get a teeny piece of the quilt in it, just a little bit of the binding, so I can kind of tie it to each other. Because when I'm scrolling through the gallery in my phone, I like to then go ahead and be like, okay, quilt, label. That's who those quilts belong to with that label, so I can properly credit. All of these artists put so much time and effort into what it is that they do that we want to make sure that they get the credit that they deserve. Let's also amplify each other, raise each other up, and make sure that we are helping each other get the credit and the amplification that they deserve overall, because let's face it, without that, I mean, what is this all about? So again, think about your process and then, make sure you're kind of following that a little bit. All right, tip number 8 is a little tricky for some of us introverts here and there, but I recommend just talking to people. You never know who you're going to meet. I have met some incredible folks at QuiltCon that I still stay in touch with on social media. We see each other again and again at QuiltCon and other events. What I recommend, if it's not on your badge already, put down your Instagram handle or social media handles on there, because many times we'll recognize that handle name and before we recognize like an actual name, and we're like, that face looks familiar, how do I know you? And you're looking at the badge and it has their Instagram handle, oh, I follow you, I've seen your quilts. So that's something that I would recommend doing, as well as make sure you have, a fine point Sharpie, the Bostonian me's coming, Sharpie Maca. Bring a Sharpie with you and write that on your badge if it's not already printed. Previous years it was included. The past few years it hasn't been added to the badge, so I recommend adding that in. So write it on there. Introduce yourself by your name and your handles as well, because that may help folks follow you, or again, make that connection, that association with who you are. And if you want, bring stickers, bring any sort of business cards or buttons to trade, but also don't stress if you don't have them. It's not an expense that you really need to spend a ton of money on if you don't have them. But if you do, it's a fun way to connect with fellow quilters. So you may see some of that, but again, don't feel the pressure of doing that just because everyone else is. All right, tip number 9 is kind of going back to some of the purchasing side of things. The vendor hall is so much fun to walk through. But before you go to the vendor hall and before you even leave to go to QuiltCon or any quilt event, take inventory of what you have. I'm gonna nerd out a little bit. I actually have a spreadsheet in Google Drive where I track all of the thread that I have from several different vendors. So for one vendor, I will write down all of the numbers that I'm aware of and how many cones or spools of thread that I have. And I'll have another tab for another thread vendor that I will use frequently, so that I know, oh, there's a great deal on this thread. Wait, I already have 4 of those. I don't need any more right now. I don't need to spend the money as much as I would like to. What quilts do you need backings for that you need to start thinking about? If so, maybe take an index card and glue or staple some of those fabric swatches to it so you can match that up, and it's easy for you to figure out what backing fabric you need and write down the size of it. What thread are you running low on? If you keep track of it, you might be able to think about that. What projects are you planning or are you working on? Are there any celebrations, baby showers, weddings, retirement ceremonies? What do you need to make a quilt for that you may want to think about and look for when you're at the event? Think about what your local quilt store carries versus what you can get at home in a show. What is unique? Do you even live near a local quilt store? Or is this your one opportunity to stock up on some stuff? If so, you may even want to pack a suitcase within a suitcase and grab some things. What tools do you need replacing or that you already have? What gifts do you need to purchase for sewing friends? We have our annual quilters retreat for the Boston Modern Quilt Guild shortly after, and we do kind of a secret stitcher where we might exchange some gifts. So I always keep my eye out for those, $5 trinkets or things like that could be a really good secret swap item for that. And is there anything that you really are excited about that you've seen recently online that your local store doesn't carry? These are things you may want to think about so that as you're going through the vendor hall, you're not just buying willy-nilly, you're purchasing with some intention. I think as quilters, we're so quick to purchase and purchase and purchase, which there's nothing against, but I'm also personally trying to be a lot more sustainable in my quilting practice. I only have so much room in my sewing room for more fabric, for more notions. So if I approach QuiltCon and other events with a little bit more intentionality around what I want to purchase, I find I am smarter about my purchases. I'm supporting the right vendors that I want to support. And I will buy because I know I need this backing. I need this thread. I have this event coming up. So I'm able to purchase in a very smart way. All right, tip number 10, and probably my favorite of them all, is you are going to be so inspired and you're going to want to sew after QuiltCon. Schedule some planned sewing time after. I know many of us will have family activities, events, when we get home from it because we're traveling, but you may want to think about doing some stuff with a sew-in with your guild if you're a member of a guild. We always have our quilt retreat the following month, which is a coincidence, but it's always awesome because I leave QuiltCon and I head to retreat the next month. And my inspiration is just flowing and I'm ready to start creating. So maybe block off a day the following weekend to start to think about how you create, gather with your guild, create that sew-in, get the bee for dinner and drinks to chat about what you're inspired by, and get ready to sew right after because I guarantee you're gonna wanna sew right away. And that also might help you plan some purchases. Okay, those are my top 10 tips for QuiltCon or any other kind of quilt show that you might attend. What did I miss? I am going to do a follow-up with some travel essentials for quilt shows. So if you have some advice for that as well, hang on to that. We're going to do a separate video, but did I miss any tips that others should know about, or do you want to add on to some of the ones that I already mentioned? Thank you so much for watching. If you are going to be at QuiltCon, please say hi if you see me. Otherwise, I will see you back here at some point. Happy quilting, and we'll see you real soon.